was like a preemptive there. And you're live.
Okay, great.
Hi, folks. I just want to welcome you to our Outcome Measures Work Group meeting, and I am handing it over to Emma Pellerin, who will run this whole meeting in a fine fashion, as she usually does. Emma.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Welcome, everyone. As Laura said, we're excited to be back again for the 12th meeting of the Outcome Measures Work Group. So I'll just go ahead and go over our agenda really quickly. If we could go to the next slide. We're just going to go over a couple of quick updates, and then in today's meeting, we'll actually be turning the reins over to our colleagues at MLDSC, Bess and Angie, to share a draft target setting framework to the whole work group. And we discussed this at the last work group meeting, and this is going to be an opportunity to share feedback on the draft target setting framework that they've been working on. And we're really excited to get your ideas and insights on this, and to have this opportunity to discuss that proposal. Then we have some time to share updated versions of our logic maps. So I'll be going over a few versions of those for feedback, and then we'll just quickly touch on next steps at the end of the meeting. And we have ample discussion time really built into today's meeting. So we're excited to hear from you. Looking forward to a robust discussion through both parts of today's meeting. Last night, or what was it? Yeah, I think it was yesterday, I sent you the meeting reminder with the Zoom link, and as well as some just reminders about meeting materials that we have, including the final report of Dr. Toltson's report prioritizing equity at the forefront of outcome measures. That was presented at our last work group meeting on October 26th. That is currently available on the AIB website as well. So you all should have a copy of that. And in addition to that, I also sent the full list of outcome and output measures that were adopted by the AIB, just in an Excel spreadsheet, so you can have them for your reference. But these are ones you've all seen before and are in the adopted, updated comprehensive plan for 2023 as well. But just wanted to make sure that you both had that you had both of those easily accessible. So that was one quick update, or two quick updates. And then we have another exciting update to share. So I would like to welcome a new student member to the Outcome Measures Work Group. I'm pleased to announce that Shamir Berg, who is joining us for today's meeting, is now a member of the Outcome Measures Work Group, and we're so excited to have him on board. So Shamir is a 10th grade student studying film at Baltimore School for the Arts. And he's on camera right now because he's not on camera right now. So we're just going to give Shamir an opportunity to say hello to everyone off camera. But we're really excited to have you join us, Shamir. So I'll just give you a second to say hello, and welcome you to the team.
Hi, everybody. I'm Shamir Berg. As Emma said, I'm a 10th grader at Baltimore School for the Arts. And thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to do great work.
Thank you, Shamir. Okay.
Sorry, Emma. Shamir, I just want to say that the chat is blowing up with welcome messages to you. So when you can look at the chat, you should do that. Sorry, this is Laura Stapleton.
That's fine. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Definitely. Again, so excited to have you on board, Shamir. So we'll go ahead and transition now to the next part of the meeting, which is the presentation discussion of the draft target setting framework. So Angie, I know that you have some slides prepared to present, and Bess and Angie will be taking over from here. So we'll go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Emma. I'm Angie Henneberger. I am the research director for the MLDS Center, and I'm on the faculty at the University of Maryland School of Social Work. The MLDS Center has been asked to work on a draft target setting process, which would provide a decision tree for determining methods for target setting for the AIB outcome and output measures. Right now, we are focused on the framework for selecting a method for target setting. We're not setting targets in this meeting or in this presentation. I just wanted to give a quick shout out and thank you to the ex officio members who have seen prior versions and provided valuable feedback on this draft target setting framework. Once the AIB adopts a process and the data sources and definitions are finalized, the extant data can be used to determine options for targets, and that's what we'll be talking about today. In the grand scheme of things, options would then be provided to the AIB, and targets will ultimately be decided upon by the board. So in terms of our agenda for today, we're first going to walk through the draft target setting process. Then we will move to examples where there is only one baseline data point. We'll also walk through examples with 3 or more comparable data points, and then we'll open it up for discussion and questions and other considerations. So Bess, I will now turn it over to you.
Thanks, Angie. Hi, everyone. I'm Bess Rose, statistician with the Maryland Longitudinal Data Systems Center and on staff at University of Maryland School of Social Work, for those I haven't met before. This draft target setting framework that we're bringing for your consideration today is adapted from one that was used by the Healthy People 2030 initiative. This was an initiative of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. In their setup, they had work groups that were formed based on subject matter expertise. And those work groups were tasked with setting targets for their given set of measures. They used a decision tree to decide what methodology to use for target setting and applied that methodology to set targets. Our goal today is to gather feedback from you about this draft framework. I'll be walking you through each step of this framework, which takes the form, as I said, of a decision tree. Next slide. So this is the draft target setting framework decision tree. This is the entire framework, and I'll be walking you through step by step today. The goal of the framework, as I said, is to guide the group's choice of method for setting targets. Those methods of setting targets are in the 4 circles across the bottom. So depending on how you answer the questions in the decision tree, it'll guide you to a choice of target setting methodology in a circle. Note that at the bottom, there is also a sentence that says you may choose another method if you provide additional justification. So it's a lockstep decision tree, but at no point are you locked in to a specific target setting methodology if you can have additional justification for using a different method. Next slide, please. So the first step in the decision tree is to first consider whether the target should be consistent with existing state or federal programs, regulations, policies, or laws. If so, the target should, as you can see in the first circle at the bottom, maintain consistency with the state or national program, regulation, policy, or law. If that is a long-term goal, if the stated target in the law, for example, is a 10-year goal, you may need to set incremental, for example, annual or every 3 years targets or something like that in order to gauge progress toward that ultimate long-term goal. Next slide, please.
And Bess, I just wanted to quickly, add that in this case, that would include maintaining consistency with blueprint law, like if there are targets that are embedded in the blueprint law, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. And it didn't actually specify that, but that's the intent here. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Yes. Okay, so here we see if we answer no to that first question, we move to question B. Is the baseline already where you want to be? This would be great if the baseline is already at a desired level of performance. And so if so, you answer yes. And so your methodology is simply to maintain baseline. Choose a target that is maintenance of that baseline value. Next slide. Otherwise, if the baseline is not already where we want it to be, we move to question C. Are there 3 or more comparable data points? An important word here is comparable. Just having 3 or more years of any data is not necessarily enough. The group must determine whether the data definitions were consistent across years or whether there were any issues with the data from those years. The data have to be comparable. So if the answer to this question is no, there are not 3 or more comparable data points, the only option is in that circle at the bottom to use what's called the percent improvement or minimal statistical significance tool. That is using a single data point. And we will show you some examples on the next slide. So here are 2 examples of measures that are based on a single baseline value, just a single, say, year of existent data. The first example with a type of measure is a percentage. For example, let's say your measure is the percent of students who are proficient on an assessment. That takes the form of a percentage. In this example, the baseline value is 50%. The group can choose targets based on different effect sizes abbreviated with the letters ES on this slide. If you anticipate that your effect size will be small, let's say a 0.10 effect size, that translates in this example to a 5 percentage point change. So you could calculate that based on a baseline value of 50%, add 5 percentage points to that, and your target could be 55%. However, if you anticipate a slightly larger effect of the intervention, an effect size of 0.20, that would equate in this example to a 10 percentage point change. So your calculation would be your baseline value of 50 plus 10 is 60%. So your target option could be 60%. Next slide. Yes. The second example is for a type of measure that's not based on a percentage. For example, a mean test score. Let's say on this hypothetical test, your baseline value is 120. You would use the percent change approach over in the far right columns. Similar to before, you can anticipate a small effect size of 0.10. That would equate in this example to a 10% change. So you would take 10% of your baseline value, which if your baseline value is 120, 10% is 12, and your potential target would be 132. Or you could anticipate a slightly larger effect size of 0.20. That would equate to a 20% change. And so 20% of your baseline value, 120, would be 24. So your potential target option would be 144 for the mean test score. Next slide. Now, returning back to the draft framework image, we saw what happened when we answered no to question C, whether there were 3 or more comparable data points. But what happens if we answer yes to question C? There are 3 or more comparable data points. We move to question D. This lets us consider the possibility of a trend analysis. It first lets us consider that a trend analysis or modeling has already been conducted. Next slide. Let's say yes, modeling or trend analysis has already been conducted. we're still not locked into using that prior trend analysis. It asks question F, should the target be consistent with that prior analysis? Next slide. If yes, we are comfortable with using that prior trend analysis or prior modeling, we can use that prior work in conjunction with what's called the trend analysis tool, which I'll get to in a moment. Next slide, please. Circling back to question D, let's say there are 3 or more comparable data points, but modeling or trend analysis has not yet been conducted. We go to question E. Should the target be based on a projection? There may be reasons why the group is not comfortable with basing the target on a projection, either because of issues with the trend data or some other reason the group feels it is unreasonable or impractical to use the trend data to make a projection. Next slide. If that is the case and the group says no, the target should not be based on a projection or prediction, the group can use that percent improvement tool we discussed previously, just using a single baseline value. Next slide. However, if the group is comfortable with the target being based on a projection, the group can use what I referred to a moment ago, the trend analysis tool. Some examples are on the next slides. We want to show you some different examples to demonstrate what trend analysis entails. Okay, next slide. Thanks, Angie. So this first example shows you what happens when we use this Excel tool. This is an Excel tool that was provided by the Healthy People 2030 initiative. It allows you to plug in any trend data from any measure that you choose. This example, we chose using trend data on rates of dual enrollment in Maryland. This data is from the MLDS Center dashboard. So in this graph, let me walk you through. I want to take some time to walk you through what you're seeing here. First of all, you're seeing a blue line that reflects actual data from the years 2011 through 2021. You can see the years across the x-axis at the bottom, and you can see the blue line reflects data from those years. Percentages are on the y-axis. You can see that the percentage of high school students who were dually enrolled in the first year of data, that's 2011, was just under 2%. And then moving across over to the final year of actual data, 2021, you can see it was a little over 7%. Now, the orange regression line is demonstrating for you what average linear growth looks like in the years of extant data from 2011 to 2021, and then it projects into the future based on that linear regression. You can see the orange dotted line moving from over to the right from the years 2022 to 2028. There's also a dashed regression line just above that orange regression line. That dashed line shows the values with only a 10% likelihood of being met under current conditions. There's a solid dark line just under the orange regression line that shows the values with 90% probability of being met under current conditions. So just to clarify, these projections and these predictions of the values with a 10% chance of being met or the values with a 90% chance of being met are based on current conditions, not anticipating any potential change. Notice that in this model, the 10% and 90% chance of success lines are pretty close to that orange dotted regression line. That's because the trend data are pretty definitively linear, showing a direct upward linear trend. So one way of thinking about it is that there is high confidence that the future values will be relatively close to that orange prediction line. Finally, let me point out on this slide, there's a green horizontal line projecting the 2019 value into the future. This tool allows you to choose any year that you choose as your baseline year. So we chose to use the 2019 year as a baseline year, just to be able to have that green line on there showing you where that 2019 value would fall on the graph, just as a point of comparison. Next slide. So here we see an example of a measure with a slightly less clear trend. This is rates of immediate fall college enrollment for high school graduating cohorts. Again, this comes from the MLDS Center website. You can see the actual blue data are from the high school graduating cohorts of 2008 through 2021. You can see the measure kind of goes up and down over the years. There was a high point reached just before COVID in 2019, and you can see the solid horizontal green line projecting that 2019 value, just showing you where that 2019 value would fall into the future years. The solid orange line, again, is the regression line based on past trends and projecting to 2028 based on prior performance. So in this example, it's an interesting example because you can see the orange line predicts catching up to that 2019 value, that green line, by 2028. So just by 2028, under current conditions, the college enrollment rate is predicted to catch up to that 2019 pre-COVID value. Again, under current conditions, not taking into account the potential change due to the blueprint. Next slide, please. So again, just quickly, here's another example. This is actual data from the Maryland National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, grade 4 reading test. You can see the performance is going up and down over the years. This is the mean score for Maryland. So you can see those are scores going up and down the y-axis. And this data goes back to 1998. And you'll see it's the assessment is not given every year. So the years that you see across the bottom generally go every other year. But again, you can see that orange regression line, and you can see there's a kind of wide confidence interval here between the dashed line predicting the values for which there is only a 10% chance of success, and lower down below the other lines is the solid line predicting the values with a 90% chance of success. So you can see some potential values that would be very safe predictions based on a 90% chance of success, or values that would be a very risky prediction based on only a 10% chance of success. Okay, next slide, please. And finally, we wanted to show you an example of some existing data that have kind of a downward trend. This is actually data from Virginia, from the Virginia Department of Education, showing the percent of teachers with national board certification. This data starts in 2012. And you can see the actual data on that blue line. There's some up and down movement, but the general trend is downward. So that orange line is kind of a downward slanting line. Again, this is a real example, but it's using data from a different state. That just gives you an example of what a trend line might look like if it were on a downward trend. So we wanted to just show you a few different examples that might show you the different types of patterns we might see when we're analyzing trend data. They won't all show that nicely upward trend like the first example. You'll see examples that are up and down over the years. Next slide. So returning to the draft framework, again, let me remind you that the option at the bottom does allow to choose another method and provide additional justification. So nowhere in the decision tree is anyone locked into any specific methodology. But that concludes our overview of the entire target setting framework. Again, kudos to the Healthy People 2030 initiative that provided this framework and the tools and a white paper. Many resources are on their website if you are interested in checking it out. There's a lot more detailed information there. Next slide. So finally, we want to share with you some guidance and considerations that are necessary as we work through this framework. For a group working with this framework to actually go through the process of setting targets, there's some important considerations. First of all, prior to working through the target setting framework, it would be important to consider what are the data sources for each measure, what are the accepted operational definitions, what are the reliability and validity of the measures, the way they are currently worded and based on the data that is currently available. This framework kind of assumes that there is at least one baseline year of data. That is not the case with many of our measures. Many of the AIB measures here do not have any extant data, so that is something to consider. When the target setting process is undertaken, when choosing trend and baseline years, it's important to consider concurrent educational policy and economic conditions, most importantly, perhaps, of which is COVID, of course. As you saw in the examples, you could see how it looked like college enrollment, for example, definitely took a hit after COVID began. So it's important to consider what is comparable data and are there any intervening conditions that would make data unusable or that should drive the consideration to use some years of data but not others. Next, very importantly, when calculating potential targets, it's important for the group to consider what is the expected effect of the blueprint and also how it relates to other blueprint efforts. These targets should not be calculated in isolation, and they need to be calculated depending on in-depth knowledge of the interventions that are planned by the blueprint and their expected effect. And each measure does not exist in isolation from the others. As one measure is anticipated to rise, another measure may be anticipated to be on hold for a while or something like that. For the legislatively mandated 10-year goals, do we expect small growth in the first few years with larger growth later? Or do we expect linear growth with the same increment of change each year? Do we set targets for measures that are more distal? Do we simply want to predict no change for the initial, maybe first couple of years for measures that we think won't actually come into play until later on? And finally, additional considerations. What if there is no available extant data to assess the outcome measure? Should we just only set targets for outcome measures for which there is extant data? And do we set 3-year targets, 5-year targets, 10-year targets, all of the above? And finally, how should a framework like this consider targets by LEA? We showed you examples using state level data where we had plugged in state level extant data points into the tool. Similarly, one could use LEA level or district level data to plug into that tool and generate very similar graphs based on each district's extant data. It doesn't have to be statewide data plugged into that tool. That concludes our overview of the draft setting framework, and we've shared some guidance and considerations that have been raised to us as we've discussed the tool and the framework with some of our stakeholders and ex officio members. I'm going to turn it back over to Emma, and I believe she will be facilitating the questions and answers.
Yes, thanks so much, Bess. Angie, I wonder if we could actually put that set of questions back up. I'm just thinking folks might find that helpful in guiding some of their questions about what was presented. And then if needed, maybe we could go back to some of the slides if that comes up in the discussion. Is that all right?
Yeah. And it might be good to also, if folks want to see the slide with the whole framework.
Yeah. Again, this is posted on the AIB website, though, too, if you need to take a look at that.
Yes, the other thing I wanted to do was put in the link to the Healthy People 2030 resource, and I just added that to the chat.
Yes.
Okay, give me 1 second to put that
No.
considerations back up.
But thank you for such an extensive overview. I have a couple questions, but while you're doing that, Angie, anybody have any immediate reactions, questions that you'd like to ask at this time? Go ahead, Shamoya.
This is just a very general one. I'm curious about why the Healthy People 2030 framework was selected. Are they seeing particular successes or revealing new things in the data as they're moving forward with their work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. No, it wasn't based on their successes. It was based on the thoroughness of the framework to allow for the various kinds of options and considerations. It seemed like a strong exemplar in that regard.
And Bess, I think you had also spoken too about the years of experience that they have in doing this, thinking about it.
Oh, that's right. Yes, that was something that they've been doing it since 1979, and they set targets every 10 years. And so they've gone through the iteration and learned and improved upon it. If you go to the website, they have some discussions about the process that they've gone through over the years and tweaking the framework and the Excel tools that they also provide, and as well as the white paper that goes through the kind of statistical formulas and things for some of the calculations. It was very thoroughly described. Thanks, Shamoya.
Mike.
Yes. First of all, can you hear me? Excellent. So first of all, that was a very impressive presentation and a very sophisticated approach to setting targets, at least as far as I can tell. But it does raise a couple of big questions for me. I'm trying to wrap my head around what's the magnitude of the task ahead of us. So do you know how many of the indicators that were in the spreadsheets that you sent out earlier today, how many of those have 3 years of comparable data? I mean, is that a small number? Is that most of them? And similarly, how many have at least 1 year of decent data? Just again, I'm trying to get a handle on how manageable or unmanageable all of this is going to turn out to be.
Really good question. We're still trying to figure that out, is the short answer. It's a long process. And so we will let you know as soon as we have that answer, but it's a very good question.
Thanks. So that alone tells me just how big a task this is.
Yep.
Happy to help if you can see ways I can do that.
Sorry, what were you saying? What was that,
I'm
Mike?
just happy to help on that task if you can see ways that I can be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That'd be great. Any other questions, Mike? And I think you said that you had some, like a few big questions that come to mind.
Oh,
was that it?
I just told you what. My mind's not big enough to handle.
Okay, sorry. I wasn't sure if there's any more
questions.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Thanks so much. Gilda, go ahead. I see your hand.
Yeah, no, I just want to say I appreciate the examples with the baseline showing how the 10%, the 90%. That was very helpful with the various examples. So I know that you want to have questions and conversation about this, but I was curious, like, what is your next step with this?
Right now, it's refining the target setting process based off of the feedback that we receive from you all, from any other stakeholders who weren't able to join today, but maybe have some thoughts after viewing this, since this is a live stream. If there's any other feedback, and just really refining as necessary, and then bringing it to the AIB for review and adoption. And then, from there, and we'll get to this later, we're continuing to determine, what the data sources are. And like Mike asked, getting through those really meaty questions around what kind of comparable extant data do we have. That is really the next, is a continuing task. And honestly, it's probably going to be kind of running concurrently for a large part of this work. As we set targets for some, we might still be looking at what data we have available for other measures concurrently.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That's a good question. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, just a couple comments. First, I want to thank Angie and Beth for all their work in identifying this framework and then making something very complex, very digestible for the work group and then for the public at large. I think to me it seems like in concept the framework seems like it has high potential to make a lot of sense, but I do think some of this the devil's going to be in the details, and I think once we start getting real data points in there and then looking at projections and then getting that into the hands of practitioners and folks like the individuals on this work group that can that know schools well and can make a pretty good assessment whether the targets that are surfaced are ones that are rigorous yet attainable. I think that's going to be where the rubber hits the road, and we'll be able to see actually how functional the tool is. But just conceptually, it does make a lot of sense. But I think also just taking a step back that it won't be until we actually get the data points in there and people who know schools well are able to determine whether those are the right measures that will actually know whether we've landed on something that is real, tangible, and workable.
Joe, I think that's a really good point, and I think it also underscores the important role that this work group will play in this process. We have a diverse group of individuals from across Maryland who are both practitioners as well as researchers and working for state agencies. That is part of why this work group was created, to be able to get that expertise, to get your insights as we operationalize things that in theory we believe will work well. And then, as you said, when the rubber hits the road, it's a little different. So again, I think that's a really good point to elevate. Any other questions? I don't see any other hands raised, but any other questions? And Shamoya pointed out in the chat, just asking about other comparable frameworks. And so I just said that we'll circle back about that, because I think the question is, what are that key point of comparable high quality frameworks to this, if there are any other ones. So we'll certainly circle back about that once we kind of can provide some more information about the comparability of high quality and really define that. And Beth, did you want to say something?
I was just going to chime in, Emma. Thanks. If folks have one in mind that they think is a good example, please send it along. We are open to looking at other examples as well.
Yes, if you have other ideas or suggestions or comments that you'd like to share outside of the work group today, it's hard to share this in a PDF document or something in advance. So this is, there was a need to walk through this framework and explain it to get that context that's necessary to understand it. And you have the materials too. So if you, go home and say, all right, after a good meal and some sleep, I've thought more about this and I have some ideas, I have some questions and feedback, please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know what you think. And if you have any other questions that we can answer. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess beyond that, if, presuming that there's someone out there in the public that is watching this video or this live stream that also has some, insights into, either different ways to look at this or a different framework that would be helpful in pushing our thinking forward, how did they let us know of that information? What's the mechanism for that?
Well, we do have feedback forms on our website, a communications form on our website, The other easy way to do that is just to contact us over email. Again, our contact information for AIB staff is on our website. My email is there, so you can directly contact me to let me know if you have some insights that you would like to share as well.
Great, thanks.
That's a good question though, Joe. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions, comments? No? Okay. So we'll go ahead and transition then to the next part of our meeting, which is presenting on the updated logic maps. And I think Lisa A is on, and Lisa, if you wouldn't mind sharing the slide deck when you have a chance. Thank you. Okay, and if we could actually go to the slideshow mode, just because we have a lot of detailed slides today. So I want everyone to be able to see if they can. And again, these are posted on our website. So if you are having trouble with the logic maps in terms of seeing them in this presentation, strongly recommend that you download the slide deck and zoom in on your screen. But I just wanted to take a second to remind anyone who may be joining us for the first time, actually. So this wouldn't be necessarily a reminder, but just sharing a little bit of the context for the need for logic maps, what their purpose is. And this will be a reminder for folks who are joining us today as part of the work group or who have watched some of our previous session where we have shared logic maps way back in the spring and early summer. So logic maps are models, maps. We kind of use the terms interchangeably a little bit here, but the more complex versions where there's lots of different elements, we've been calling them maps. These are visual representations of a theory of action that help guide a program or policy's implementation. They can also help inform program evaluation that is done and that will be done as part of the blueprints implementation. And they're important because they tell us where we're going, how we'll get there, and how we know if we'll be successful in implementing a particular initiative or policy in a really effective way. They can help to build broad understanding of a complex system or problem and clarify underlying beliefs that are part of that approach. Just really elevate them and ensure that there's broad understanding of what those beliefs are. Again, while communicating all of this information in an efficient and effective way to a variety of individuals and stakeholders, a really broad audience. If you could go to the next slide, please. So we have created logic models or logic maps to visualize and help interpret the blueprints theory of action. You'll have seen different versions of this logic map in previous presentations. This is our blueprint level theory of action logic map. And this is an updated version. It should look a little different from ones you've seen in the past. But really what we're trying to capture here is are the high level objectives that are embedded within 5 different pillars of the blueprint, how they're interconnected and how they depend on one another, and the overall outcome that they're trying to work together to achieve. The big thing here that has changed since previous versions, well, first of all, what hasn't changed? We have pillars that work together and are connected with one another and depend on one another, that are all held accountable by this larger accountability focused pillar, which is pillar 5. And they are all working towards this overall expected outcome of the blueprint. On the right here in this kind of reddish maroonish square, which is all Maryland students will leave high school globally competitive and prepared for success in post-secondary education, work, and life. So this is our overall expected outcome of the blueprint. If we implement it effectively and efficiently and faithfully, this is what the theory of action is saying will happen. And this is what the blueprint is built on. And the way that this has changed from previous versions, we've really elevated the idea here with pillar 3, that there are kind of, I don't want to say 2 steps, but there's 2 major objectives within pillar 3, and one does feed into the other. That being that a huge objective in pillar 3 is to build an engaging and rigorous instructional system that is aligned to the updated CCR standard when we do have this updated standard. And that does depend on the other objectives of pillars 1, 2, 4, and of course 5 being met. But they also feed into this second objective within pillar 3, that all students will have opportunities to participate in rigorous or robust post-CCR pathways. So when we're thinking about the activities that are embedded within pillars 1, 2, 3, and 4, as well as the accountability structures that are embedded in pillar 5, that is in many ways all supporting the second really big objective of pillar 3, which is to ensure that students can reach the CCR standard and participate in post-CCR pathways that will help prepare them for post-secondary success, and to do so while they are in high school. So this is a really high-level representation of the theory of action. And before we take questions, I am going to pause, I promise, but I want to show you a couple more versions of this logic map before we get there. So if we could go to the next slide. Okay, here we go. So this is a little bit of a simpler version and doesn't really show the interconnections, but we thought it would be helpful for you to see the main elements of each of these pillars represented by pillar, or the main elements of the blueprint represented by pillar. So yes, the overall objective of pillar 1 is to ensure that students enter kindergarten prepared or ready to learn. And to do that, we are expanding access to early interventions, targeted supports, and expanding access to publicly funded full-day pre-K. And similar with pillar 2, 3, 4, 5, there are these larger objectives that are built on these more discrete activities and tasks that we need to accomplish in order to get there. So, again, within all of these, even as we break down these elements, there's still activities. If you've read the comprehensive plan, if you've seen discussions of the pillar activities, if you've gone to a pillar advisory committee, you know that there's a lot that these visuals are not capturing, but we want to show, the big ideas that are embedded within the blueprint and what all of these activities are tied to in this map. So this is probably something that we'll offer as a kind of, I don't want to say appendix, but an aid in helping to interpret and understand the logic maps and the complexities of them and the interconnectedness. I wouldn't necessarily say that this is a logic map in and of itself, but I think it is a helpful visual to understand how it's organized. So if we could go to the next slide, and then after I present this one, I will pause for questions because it is complex. So it should remind you a little bit of the first logic map, the first version, in that the colors are the same, organized somewhat similarly, except that there's a lot more here. This is complex because it is, in my view, really showing the ecosystem of the blueprint. And ecosystems are not visual representations. They're complex. They're showing the complexities of different relationships, of what needs to be done and how different elements depend on each other. And really what we're talking about when we're talking about the blueprint, it's in a lot of ways an ecosystem to support this ultimate goal of getting students to post-secondary success. When you look at this logic map, there might be two things I would imagine that come to mind. One, wow, this is really complex. There's a lot of different arrows here, and how do we read this? And two, where do I even start? So to the first point, yes, this is really complex. Could be even more complex. But again, we're not trying to get at the activities here of what needs to be done to get to these big ideas of ensuring that there's more supports for students, that all students get health supports, that we recruit high quality and diverse teachers and leaders. That's not the aim here to say, this is what needs to be done to get there. It's to show the complex relationships and how different activities and objectives within the blueprint depend on other objectives being met in order to get there. And secondly, you're right, there isn't a clear starting point. And there's a reason for that, because there's no clear starting point to the blueprint. If you try to just tackle it one element or one pillar at a time, with the goal of saying, okay, as soon as we get those supports for early childhood under control, then we're going to turn to pillar 2, and we'll make sure that we're diversifying and increasing our teacher workforce. Well, actually, you're not doing the best to serve students who are currently enrolled in early childhood classrooms. Because as the logic map shows, we need those teachers to improve and expand access to publicly funded full-day pre-K. So there is, again, no single starting point. It needs to be, and that is what makes it in part very complicated, and a huge ecosystem to tackle. I'd like to, again, we have this expected outcome of the blueprint over here on the right of all Maryland students leaving high school globally competitive and prepared for post-secondary success. If you try to kind of work backwards from there and focus on a single element, again, if you tried to take something out, like if you say, okay, well, we're going to get these rigorous post-CCR pathways in place to ensure that Maryland students are prepared for post-secondary success. Well, the arrow right above it shows that that's connected to building an engaging and rigorous instructional system. And what feeds into that? Reorganizing your curriculum and assessment and pedagogy to align with that CCR standard and providing targeted supports to help all students reach the CCR standard. But what feeds into that? Elements from pillar 2, where we're transforming the roles of teachers and leaders, recruiting high quality teachers and leaders, and retaining those leaders, as well as ensuring that students are prepared to learn or prepared for kindergarten success out of these pre-K programs. So what we're, again, really trying to represent here is that there's no clear starting point. And to do this all effectively, you can't focus on one single element or one single pillar to do this. Even in some of the conversations that this work group has had, I think that it's very easy to do this because as we've looked at specific goals or objectives that the blueprint is trying to meet, we sometimes say, okay, well, what is this connected to? Why are we saying that we need, how are we saying that we're going to get students to get there? And we'll name one specific support. But as we can see from this logic map, again, there's so many different things that are feeding into this theory of action. So no, we're not going to improve student outcomes simply by, increasing and expanding the teacher workforce. It is going to require more resources for students in tandem with expanding the number and quality of our teachers and diversity of our teachers. It is going to depend on providing students with the supports that they need in kindergarten and before kindergarten. It can't just be dependent on one single thing. And that's also going to increase the complexity of setting targets. I think that that's something that Bess and Angie said before in the target setting process, that nothing is really in isolation. And, the really daunting thing too, and really exciting part of this is that the blueprint has never been done before either. So there's no single source that we can go back to and say, yep, other states did this exactly this way, so we can expect this particular effect size. So we need to keep all of this in mind when we're thinking about the target setting process. And really that's why logic maps like these are so important, because we can turn back to these and it helps remind us of how many different activities, how many different tasks are being done to increase and enhance outcomes for students. And these are all things that we need to think about when we're thinking about the targets that we're going to be setting and deciding on and recommending to the AIB. Okay, so I'm going to pause here. I spoke a lot. And just see if anybody has any questions. We do have one more version that I think will be helpful for increasing understanding of really looking at it from a student lens, but I'll pause here for questions for right now.
I don't have a question, but I just want to say this is so helpful. And I really wonder if it would be helpful, like at the legislative process time period, like when legislating, and I realize that's not ever going to happen because of the timing of how this happens. but understanding how the legislation fits together and whether that is what is intended would be very helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, I think something to think about for sure. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, so hats off for putting this all together, and you know, just really appreciative for all the thinking that has gone into this. I do wonder a little bit, and not to add so much additional complexity, but I think it would be helpful to, if there was a way to attach prescribed dollars to some of these different to some of the different portions, right? Like, because I think it gives some sense of where, you know, what the theory of action is, and what you know, where you know, what has been prioritized, and then also I think just makes it more clear for people, not just in terms of the action, but then the investment that has been put into this in order to turn the theory of action into reality. You know, I mean, I'm always struck by this statement around, you know, you want to see where people's priorities are, then, you know, open up the books and show the budget, right? Because I think that's how you know, the dollars speak, and gives a good sense of how you've gone through and prioritized things and how these things fit together. And I know that adds a lot of complexity to everything, and not everything can be represented on the flow chart, but I think aspects of that would be very helpful. I see Rachel came off of camera, so.
Yeah, I thought I'd help him out on this one. Yeah, so I mean, the funding for the various pieces of the blueprint are embedded in the funding formulas. And then there are some new funding formulas to support different pieces of it. So we from developing the funding, taking the cost estimates and developing the funding formulas, we certainly have like per pupil amounts. So, and then it all had to get boiled down to a per pupil basis, because the funding formulas are per pupil. So we have per pupil amounts, you know, that then you know, aggregate to a estimated cost to implement or funding provided to implement various pieces, and that's state and local funding, not just state funding. So we could, I think it would be a lot to try to embed it into this document, but we do have the other information that you're talking about. We could think about how we could try to sort of connect the dots without actually putting it in the same graphic.
Sorry, I was answering a question in the chat. And then Gilda, I see you have your hand up, but first, I see Shamoya put in the chat that appreciating the mind-bending cognitive power it took to get to this very understandable map, which we appreciate that comment. So thank you. And I'm sure that the folks who worked on this visualization really appreciate that comment. So thank you for that feedback. And you pointed out a couple things here. One, a question about the use of stakeholders when we're saying hold stakeholders accountable in the Pillar 5 part of the map. I'm wondering if we could get the map back up when we have a second. But I think that you said that the use of implementers versus stakeholders might make more sense here. And I think that that is certainly language that we can re-examine. There might be some overlap when we think about stakeholders and implementers, like even if you might be implementing, but still be impacted by the blueprints. I think that that was part of what we were trying to get at here, but I understand your comment there, and we can re-examine that use of language. The question about public, and then you also put a comment around public engagement and transparent communication missing from Pillar 5. It's a good point. I think that it's hard to just, we don't want to put it in its own category as something that is done just once. I think that effective communication and transparent communication is embedded in all parts of this. It has to be embedded in planning and supporting implementation and holding implementers accountable in evaluating impact and continuously improving. So that's why, we wouldn't want to just have a single marker on its own, suggesting that it doesn't have to be embedded through all these implementation activities and in all of the work that we're doing. But maybe there's a way we can still speak to that in an updated version or call that out more explicitly. But I hesitate to give it its own element, just because it would seem like, okay, well, this is as if it's not a systemic approach, that we're always doing this for every element, which is the intent. We always want to be effectively and transparently communicating with stakeholders and with the public. But those are good thoughts. So thank you for that feedback. We appreciate
it. I appreciate that, Emma, and I'll totally hear your point there. I put a link to this policy cycle image that I've been using for probably way too long that might get at like that shared sentiment that the communication and the transparency has to be ongoing and embedded. So
great, thank you. Thank you for that. Gilda, go ahead. Oh, Gilda, I think you're on mute. I was on mute and then you're on mute. Sorry.
No, what I was saying was that this visual is very helpful, and maybe another way to also present the information, just so that for the different visual learners, is to have a matrix. I don't know if we have that already created also, but it's a similar thing, but with a matrix, so that it's like, columns and check boxes. Just a thought.
Absolutely. That's we do have those Excel spreadsheets with the implementation activities that we used and still have on our website, and updating along with the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan with timelines for implementation. But I don't think that they would be like a checkbox of activities or anything like that. But I don't think it quite gets at what you're talking about, but maybe it's somewhat overlapping. But yeah, that's an interesting idea. So we will definitely think about ways that we can make that more understandable and represented differently. So thank you. Any other questions? Any other comments on this? Okay. So this is one representation of, again, the theory of action. The next slide has the same representation. It just doesn't have the expected outcome on the right and is blown up a little bit bigger, so you can see it a little bit more easily. But we are going to be doing this continuously. We're updating this continuously. I think we will get to a point where it's more or less set, but as we continue to implement the blueprint, we are learning more things about what needs to be done to implement it effectively. So this, in some sense, is always going to be a living document, and always, subject to change as we learn more through the blueprint's implementation. But we will continue to provide you with updated versions. The other thing too is that not everyone is going to have the opportunity to hear from me and explain this logic map and have the time to do that. So we probably want different versions for different audiences. So we are thinking about that. maybe a more simplified version, kind of similar to what we saw on top in the first version, but maybe there's something else that can go along with that to help aid understanding of what we're talking about with the interconnections between the different pillars. And lastly, we are also working on pillar level logic maps, which you saw versions of in the spring, and we're continuing to update them. I think the big thing that we're trying to do is really organize all of those different tasks and activities that you see in the comprehensive plan in each pillar that you saw in the previous versions of the pillar logic maps, and kind of group them under these bigger ideas of support, of funding, of providing targeted supports, of reaching the CCR standard, of recruiting high quality and diverse teachers and leaders. You see these ideas represented in the logic maps, and we're going to try to do that also in the pillar level logic map. So we'll be providing those updates as well when they're available. And we will also be providing you with the outcome and output measures and showing how they are connected back to these big ideas. Once we're trying to back map them, just beyond organizing them by pillar and by output and outcome measure. We'll also provide a backwards map that shows you, really what ideas they're connected to in this logic map. I think it's harder to explain when you in this really in this format. So I'm excited to eventually have the opportunity to show you what we mean by that. But yes, I think if there's no other questions right now, we'll go ahead and move to the last logic map. So if we could go to slide 9, actually, that would be great. And this one's a little bit different. I think we might. I think we might be having some tech difficulties. So here we go. Okay, great. And Lisa, if we could go to slide 9, so just skip the next slide.
Now, hold on.
Yeah, no problem. I've been there. Okay, you know what? I can, Lisa, I think I can do the last slide. That's okay. Here, I'll get that up and running.
I have it.
Oh, you got it? Okay,
Yeah.
great. Okay, perfect. Yeah, this is the one. So this slide, I really, compared to the other slides, is really not showing necessarily the ecosystem of the blueprint in terms of the connections between the pillars, but showing what elements of the blueprint students will experience in their K-12, pre-K through 12, really birth to 12 educational experience. So when we're thinking about an individual student and how they will experience the blueprint, this really tries to visualize this and represent that journey for you. So we have at the bottom, birth to pre-K, you see the elements of pillar 1 that students will experience, being expanded access to support for children ages 0 to 5 and their families, and expanded access to high quality pre-K. You'll see consistent services for targeted supports and funding for multilingual learners, students with disabilities, and students in high poverty schools throughout grades K through 12, as well as access to behavioral and physical health services for all students. Again, these are things that are embedded in the blueprint, so that doesn't mean that it's not addressed in other ways, but these are really supports in the that the blueprint calls out for and that are identified in the blueprint comprehensive plan. And then that's all around wraparound supports and targeted funding. And then there's also supports in terms of academic curriculum and how students will experience that. Students will be aware of these post-CCR pathways prior to grade 10, but that's when they reach the CCR standard and can access the post CCR pathway. That's what we wanted to represent here, and the curriculum and rigorous instructional system that'll help them reach that CCR standard. That's really grades K through 10, where they're experiencing that system. And then the personalized supports as well that are embedded within the blueprint. Again, you're getting those individualized career counseling services and supplemental services all the way through grades K through 10. And then as students are working towards the CCR standard and reaching the CCR standard by grade 10, they're continuing to get that progress monitoring throughout their educational journey to see what supports they need to get to that CCR standard. Again, a reason that I like this visual is that it's a different way of understanding how the blueprint works and what support students are getting. But if you think about, again, like focusing on specific pillars versus looking at the blueprint and ensuring its effective implementation overall, you'll be missing out on elements that students need throughout their educational experience. So if you, again, really focus on grades, on providing, setting up the system for supporting a strong pre-K system, you'll be missing out on the supports that students who are currently in high school, who are in grades 11 and 12, need to access those post-CCR pathways. So you need to be thinking about all of this, and vice versa. If you're focusing mostly on these post-CCR pathways for grades 11 and 12, because those kids are about to graduate, and yes, that is really critical. But what about the kids who are about to enter pre-K, about to enter kindergarten? What supports are they getting to set them up for future success, so that when they get to grades 11 and 12, they are accessing these post-CCR pathways and getting all of these elements that are embedded within the blueprint. So there's the trickiness of this is that with Pillar 2, we aren't really seeing that here because this is more representing a student's journey. So we're still kind of working through that and how we could potentially embed this into this particular visual representation. But this is where we are right now. And I do think that this is helpful for, kind of a different interpretation than what the previous logic models showed. So I'll pause here, and I see we have a couple comments and questions in the chat. And Laura, if you want to go ahead, I see your hand up.
Sorry, I was muted. Before you mentioned the absence of Pillar 2, I was noting the absence of Pillar 2. And, just like academic curriculum, I think access to high quality, diverse teachers is part of that curriculum. So I would think that somehow that information could be in there. But I do like this idea of thinking about it as a trajectory of where the blueprint touches each sort of grade, age level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that we could, if we put it as access within the academic curriculum, access to high quality teachers all throughout, then that could be a good way for the Pillar 2 representation. I like that idea. Any other comments? Yes, Shamoya, you said maybe through inclusion of post-secondary education, we could show some of Pillar 2. Maybe there's also something even for, teachers or teacher candidate at some point that we could do some kind of logic model for. Maybe that's focused on Pillar 2. I don't know. That was just a random idea. So I might take that back. But yeah, that's interesting. A good idea too. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, just question around, clearly the blueprint is so massive that it's so challenging to include everything, but just wondering the decision to elevate certain things versus others. Like, there's no mention in here around Judy and Patty centers. There's no mention around community schools, 60% time. Like there's, I think, ninth grade on track. Like there are a lot of things that I guess are maybe more specific programs that fit within these kind of larger buckets, but you wonder if they would be important to spell out, because I do think that they're probably pretty important elements that are helping to move students and move the state forward.
Yeah.
I think they are there. They're just in buckets instead.
Sure, not spelled out explicitly. Yeah.
Access to supports for children and their families.
Sure.
Includes the Judy centers, targeted supports and funding for ELs, students with disabilities, and students in high poverty schools, and includes the community school model. So, but you're right, they're not called out, but I think that most of them, we might have missed some, but most of them should be represented, because those are school level elements that we would want to be reflected.
Well, and also, I mean, interestingly, if you actually go to the schools and you ask what evidence they see of the blueprint, I think in the minds of a lot of parents, the most prominent things are, community schools, Judy centers. They're things that that families and kids are interacting with on a regular basis, that to the extent that they're not spelled out in here, like you wonder about, ultimately trying to make the connection for the public that, this massive investment you are experiencing every day. And you're like families are interacting with the blueprint and benefiting from it. So finding ways to be explicit about it.
Maybe that goes to Emma had mentioned like different things for different audiences. So maybe it's sort of like a different version of this for parents and students.
It also makes me wonder, like, as we get the outreach and communications director on board, this is a really important question to actually start focus grouping families and asking how are you experiencing the blueprint at the ground level, and trying to help, just ensuring that the public is making a connection between this massive investment and what they're seeing on the ground level and how it's impacting both their experience, but most importantly, their kids' experience.
I think that different versions, I'm seeing some ideas in the chat, could definitely be helpful. I could also see us, if there's an interactive map or something, like if we could somehow build that, it would take some finesse and expertise with technology to build something like that out. But if you could hover over a particular element of it, of the map and online, and see, here are all the things that are part of this in the blueprint. If you want to interact with this a little bit more, I'm probably saying things that are scaring our team because we would have to build that out. So I'm going to stop talking about that. But, there's a lot of different ways that we could approach that. Tim, I see your hand. Thank you for your patience.
Not a problem. I was just going to mention that for the Pillar 2 representation on that chart as it stands, within that like center column for your academics and like curriculum area, like the data, like both the curriculum assessment and pedagogy, we're also tasked within that Pillar 2 to develop a professional development system that is aligned to all of that. And so like the professional development that's available to staff can also be represented there, because that's definitely going to impact the school level. And then the personalized supports, I don't think we can underestimate like the effect that the release time that teachers have to work with students, that is the personalized supports that are going to be occurring K-12 or pre-K-12. And so like that should be represented whenever we're talking about career ladder and representation of staff. We really have to talk about that time piece, because that's one of the most like fundamental changes that will reshape the availability of staff to do things that would be personalized supports. And so like we don't want to ever not represent that as something people would be thinking about.
Yeah. So maybe if it's if we wanted to show something that shows the student's experience of the school day or of their, I'm sorry, not school day, of their pre-K through 12 educational journey, we could do something like this. I could also see us like having arrows pointing from other elements, like from pillar 2, from pillar 5, even potentially, like that feed into supplemental services as needed. That depends on pillar 2, which is, there's the release time that's in there. And we could have arrows pointing into that to show things that are not necessarily like a student doesn't directly participate in that particular part of the blueprint, but is nonetheless impacted by it. So we're still showing that impact, even if it's not a direct participation of it. And that could be an interesting visual for a family or parent, caregiver, a student themselves to help understand, what the blueprint is based on and how these different things impact them.
And without, a lot of the initiatives within Blueprint, if we don't have that time structured well or staff to increase the availability of other staff to do some of this work, there's many places where we will fail because there's not enough staff to do that, and we're just going to continue to de-incentivize the profession, as opposed to having like this structured support where people are like, oh yeah, this makes a lot more sense, and we have increased staff to actually handle it. It's going to just increase workload for existing staff. So there's a very careful space in there that is a balance that I think we're all going to be threading.
Yeah. And versions of the pillar 2 logic map in particular, but other ones as well, needs to help elevate and visualize and represent that underlying belief, which is the an underlying belief of the blueprint that we're bringing. Well, it's actually still explicitly stated we're bringing in more teachers to professionalize teaching, and will want to be teachers in Maryland to fill those needs. Any other questions? Any other comments? I'm trying to work through here and see if there's anything we didn't capture. I don't see any hands. Okay. All right. Well, this was really good feedback. I think we have a lot of good ideas and ways to move these logic maps forward. I'd really like to take a moment to acknowledge our colleagues at NCEE and MLDSE, who were integral participants in today's work and our work on an ongoing basis. So they helped us with they really prepared the target setting framework, helped prepare the target setting framework and the logic maps for today. And, we couldn't have done this without them. So I just wanted to acknowledge our appreciation and thank you guys so much. So we can go ahead and go to the last slide to talk about next steps. Joe and Laura, before I do you have any other things that you wanted to share with the whole group? Any other comments?
Just that I hope everyone has a great Thanksgiving, but I can say that later too.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and then just to second the thank you to all the members of the work group, all the ex officio members that have stuck with us throughout all these meetings, and then in particular the support from NCEE and the MLDS Center. And then also thank you, Emma, for your leadership, for all your work around this. It's, clearly, this is something that is really important for the state, and it's clearly really important for you. And I really appreciate your desire to work so hard to try to get this right.
Thank you. Well, you guys certainly make it easier, everyone that I work with, and this work group. Thank you all so much. And thank you guys for joining us for today. So I just wanted to quickly share next steps and let you know what we're working on next. We are going to refine the target setting framework based on work group feedback as needed. And so that means if you have some suggested changes, ideas after this meeting, as I said, you can always, reach out to me individually. You could reach out really to any AIB member if you have a question, but it would be helpful if you could just let me know if you have some comments or questions. If you have a alternative framework or approach that you would like to suggest, we would also be, very happy to get those ideas. So please send them our way. And then we'll be bringing that to the AIB for adoption once that is refined based off of feedback. We also are going to continue clarifying language to operationalize the output and outcome measures as needed. In our meetings, we've been, just working through each measure and asking questions like what was posed today in that last set of guiding questions. What kind of growth are we thinking of? Does this language as it currently stands get us to where we want to go? And as we continue to clarify that language, we will be bringing it back to the whole work group with these questions and just the need for, hey, these are complications that we're thinking about. So we want to, emphasize that we'll continue to communicate that with you all. And then we are also going to continue our data collection activities. As I said before, we're still trying to figure out the extant data, what exists and what we can be looking at in terms of comparable data points to inform the target setting process. It's a long process, it's a complicated process, and we will continue to update you all as we have updates. And we are also going to share the next meeting date as soon as possible. We want to use your time wisely. So we will let you know as soon as we can when we're going to meet again. So please look out for that in your calendars. And again, we will let you know as soon as possible. So with that, unless anybody else has any other comments, if you are celebrating, have a wonderful holiday. I hope you all take some time off. And we're, again, Shamir, we're very excited to welcome you to the group. I saw your comment. Thank you so much for joining us. We are thankful for you. I'm thankful to you all and for you all. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks. We will.
Lisa, can you hit stop recording?
Gotcha.
And then also on the live stream.
All right. I'm also downloading the chat.
Perfect. Actually, Lisa, I've got the live stream.
I think it's just us now, right?